Hey, it's a Mormon Truth video. It's number 3 in the Especially for Youth on Mormon history. Let's go.
Around all his children. Um, so, Joseph Smith, you got the story. Yeah, God came to New York to see him on his first prayer. Doesn't sound quite as believable when you say it that way, but it's actually the same fact, right? Okay, so, and then 3 years later, it says he's praying in his room because he's concerned about his sins. And he says, nothing real bad, but I hung out with jovial company. Like what? People that are like getting drunk and telling bad jokes or something? I don't know. Doesn't really say. But yeah, we went over that story, and so Moroni, it says now in the version you get now, shows up and tells him, "Hey, your sins are forgiven." He tells him about the golden plates and all that sort of thing, and quotes a bunch of Old Testament prophets and stuff, and comes back, 3 different times between that 3 times that night and once in the next day, and he goes to the Hill of Gomorrah to get the plates, and it doesn't work out. Says, no, you haven't kept the commandments of the Lord. Actually, I don't think it says that in the Pearl of Great Price. Now, if you read the original documents, the story has developed. If you were in Joseph Smith's day, you would not have heard these things. You would not have heard the story of the first vision because it didn't exist. Okay, his family didn't know about this story. And since I've got this, the videos that document this stuff carefully, what I can do here is kind of go over the story. And then if you have that reaction, like, there's no way, that can't be true, that's a bunch of lies, then you can, and you should, go in and see where it's documented. And it's, it's nice because it's on video format, and I've located it for you. And you'll find, scriptures and various things, but it's laid out, so it's there, it's available, and you don't have to go searching. So you can see the source. Okay, so here's the deal. Joseph Smith was in an area where they did use seer stones. Seer stone basically works on a similar principle, I suppose, as a crystal ball. And if you've watched too much television and you think it's all a bunch of, Disney fantasy, actually, Mormonism does believe in a spiritual world. And there is contact with the spiritual world, and some people do use various implements and to do that. And I think, this is my conjecture, but that it could be done anyway. The beings in this world that we don't see have the power to do certain things, and maybe a lot more power than we think. And if they want to put words on a brown rock, maybe they can, but a crystal ball or a mirror, a dark mirror, things that people use for revelation and magic. It's a little closer to the screen on your iPhone than a brown rock. However, there was a girl in the neighborhood who had a seer stone that she saw things in. People used them to look for treasure or lost stuff, or where their chicken ran off to, or who knows what, right? And just like a crystal ball. And Joseph Smith got interested in this apparently, and he what I've read is he borrowed this girl's seer stone, was 13 years old or something, and it helped him somehow in locating one of the stones in the future, I guess, or he gave hers a try or something. But as the story goes, this one that I've got on the screen here is the brown one, which was supposedly used to translate the Book of Mormon, and I'll get into that shortly. Was supposedly found, while digging a well for a guy named Willard Chase, I believe, a neighbor. And Joseph Smith asked to borrow it and would never give it back, basically. This is the way I've read it, and I document that in one of my Magic and Mormonism videos. So you can see all the sourcing, see what I've read, and then you'll know what I know. But he started using this thing, and he got a reputation for being able to find some things. Now, you might have heard about the digging for treasure thing. They never recovered, any of Captain Kidd's treasure, but it appears that Joseph Smith was a Captain Kidd fan. I mentioned that, he liked Captain Kidd, that some island in, I think, a city or something on it, and there's Moroni and Kamura. Similar names are just like in the Book of Mormon. There's a lot of names that are very similar to places where near where Joseph Smith lived. And some people point to that and say, well, this is suspicious. But at any rate, they did do treasure digging, and they weren't successful in coming up with a trunk of treasure. They say they hit it, and they could hear it with the shovels, and then it would slip deeper into the earth, which makes no physics sense. But in the magic world, things can be moved. If you read the Book of Mormon, it's full of magic. It says that their riches became slippery. They'd have to sleep even on their swords because otherwise they wake up in the morning and it was gone. They'd bury things and they'd be gone. There's a lot of magic in there. And if you read, the spectacles, basically the magic glasses prepared by the Lord in Ether chapter 3 to translate the Jaredite record, which Mosiah supposedly used, I believe, to translate the 24 plates having the Jaredite record, as we're told in the story. It basically describes them as like magic glasses, that they're like two clear stones set in a silver bow. And we think, okay, and maybe you've seen some pictures that somebody's drawn of Joseph Smith looking through these things at some golden plates and saying, and he's magically seeing English instead of Reformed Egyptian. He's looking at Egyptian, but it's kind of like, Google Translate or Babel Fish or something, on a computer. And you're looking at it, and it's English instead of, Spanish, German, whatever. Reformed Egyptian characters. Yeah, so that's the story. And of course, Joseph Smith doesn't talk a lot about that. He just says it was done by the gift and power of God. In the Doctrine and Covenants section 1, supposedly it's Jesus like talking through Joseph Smith's mouth or something at a conference they're having. You can read it. It says it's a conference in November of 1830, and Jesus says, I gave him the power to translate it, and it is correct. Okay, you may have heard it's the most correct book, and other people may have said it's the most corrected book, because after that, thousands of changes have occurred in it. So if it was correct, why did it need to be corrected, right? There's grammatical stuff, and I'm not going to talk about that right this second. And there are also theological issues that, were changed in doctrines and so forth. Calling Jesus, his mother, Mary, the mother of God, and then changing that to the mother of the Son of God, and those are some of the things that changed. But also grammatical. It's like Jesus couldn't speak English very well or something when he's, giving them the words through the seer stone, which showed the words like on a picture of a piece of parchment, like, old ancient kind of paper, in English, right, with a character there, supposedly. And then after, say, Oliver Cowdery would write it down when Joseph Smith was telling them what it said or something, it wouldn't disappear and change to the next words until he'd done it correctly. That's the story. Or that's a quote from David Whitmer. Some of the translating occurred in the Whitmer's home. I believe Joseph F. Smith quoted that too, but you don't hear much about that because it's associated with the seer stone. And with the seer stone, Joseph Smith put it in a hat, put his face in a hat, blocked out the light, and he's looking at this brown rock, and somehow it kind of like lights up like your iPhone light, your Android. And like I said, it's easier to believe with a crystal ball, but it was a brown rock, and there's a picture of it, and that's out of the first presidency's vault. They were kind of hiding it because the story's kind of, this kind of makes people go, are you kidding me? So, they haven't been really forthright with it, and recently there's been a lot of pressure. They excommunicated people that told too much of the truth about things that happened, scholars at BYU, professors and stuff. But anyway, there's been so much pressure that now they're showing some things and then basically kind of come up with a story that makes it sound like everything's okay, but it's really the guys that write the essays, and they're approved by the First Presidency. They're not honest, and I show that in the videos. I show what they say they're going to say, and compared to the scriptures, and they contradict everything. They're not honest. They don't do what they say, and I'm not asking anyone to take my word for it. Look at the videos and I show it, one next to the other. So, okay, here's what it says in the Gospel Topic Essays. Here's what it says in 2 Nephi chapter 5. You're cursed with a skin of blackness because you are bad. God does not want you to mix with the Nephites, and any Nephite that mixes with a Lamanite will be cursed. And then, and then 3 Nephi chapter 2. The Lamanites repented and joined the Nephites to fight against the Gideon robbers, so God turns them white again. But the gospel topic essays say that's not true. They say God doesn't curse people with a black skin. It doesn't mean he's unhappy with you. But it flat out says it's a curse, it's a mark, because they're wicked, and blah, blah, blah. So, but they don't put the scripture in the essay, even though they say they're going to be fair. You know, they don't say fair and balanced, they say straightforward and in-depth. And they also say that God doesn't want us to seek just one set of opinions. A little earlier in the preface to the gospel topics essays, you may have never heard of them. You wouldn't see them. There's nothing that says on the front, homepage of LDS.org, hey, come look at all the problems the church has. Come look and see what we're arguing about here, about the 9 different versions of the first vision that contradict each other. Or come see why, why people are kind of worried about Joseph Smith translating the Book of Mormon, looking into a hat at a brown rock and not even having the golden plates, in the house. They're buried in a hollow log in the woods. Why does he even need them? Hey, Googling, what's the deal with the Book of Abraham, with them actually having the papyrus or copies of the papyrus in the Smithsonian, and they found they had them, actually, because like Emma Smith sold them to them. And it's not from Abraham. They couldn't translate it back then. Joseph Smith said he could do it, but it doesn't say anything about Abraham. It's like some guy's funeral, sermon. It's called a funerary text from BC, 200 BC or something. Not 2000 BC. Has nothing to do with Abraham. So there's a lot of arguing over that. Now the church basically says in the essay there, well, Joseph Smith didn't literally translate it, He just got inspired because he was looking at this piece of ancient parchment, and that gave him the inspiration to write the Book of Abraham. It took him 7 years. Should have taken him 2 days at the pace he did the Book of Mormon. Did he lose his brown rock? Did it have too many, moving parts, and it was in for repairs? I mean, yeah, he got these, the parchment and the mummies and all that stuff, paid $2,400, wasn't even his money. And he said it had the writings from Abraham, written by the hand of Abraham. You can go in and look at it, see what it says right there. Look at the Book of Abraham in Pearl of Great Price, and it says it's, written by the hand of Abraham. Joseph Smith also said that they had, writings from Joseph, the patriarch. Like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Joseph, father of Manasseh and Ephraim, supposedly. He had 7 years, and then he couldn't come up. He was doing like 6 pages a day with the Book of Mormon. If you look at, they say it took like 65 or 90 days or something for like 500 pages. So I don't know, 6 pages a day. How big is the Book of Abraham? Like about a dozen pages? It's like 2 days' work. But instead he starts like trying to, who knows, figure it out and learn it. He didn't learn Egyptian. He did study Hebrew. So what's that got to do with hieroglyphs? Anyway, took him 7 years, and he blows $2,400 and doesn't come up with a book of Joseph, and they say he just did it to get inspired. Well, he's got like 130 things in the Doctrine and Covenants. He had to pay $2,400 for each one of those. By the way, land, it was like a $7 an acre in Kirtland when he, bought that. So could have bought like maybe 300 acres at that price. Land was going up. So we won't even talk about the Kirtland Bank right now. That'll be another day. Kirtland not bank. Anti-banking safety society, because it was completely illegal. Anyway, the brown rock. Looking in the hat at the rock to block out the light, just like, you see the lady pulling something over her head, a cloth or something to look at her crystal ball, maybe in some movies, like, I don't know, Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz or something. They try to... People do that. And there are different ways that they take, there's automatic writing, all kinds of things where people communicate with the spiritual world. And some people are faking it, and some people are not. And I don't know if it really matters if it's a crystal ball or a brown rock, but I don't know how you see anything in a rock. I honestly don't. So the main point is the plates weren't necessary if he's looking at a rock. And there was so much involved with the story around the plates, and translating the plates is like the main evidence. Like they say, the Book of Mormon is true, Joseph Smith's a prophet. Joseph Smith's a prophet, the church is true, the church is true. Do everything we say. Pay tithing your whole life, go on a mission, whatever. Clean the building on Saturday. And take your children to seminary for 4 years at 6 o'clock in the morning. Unless you live in Utah, then you can do it in the middle of the day. So there's a lot hinging on that, and the story isn't what we've been told. So Joseph Smith, getting back to the story, maybe I'm wandering here. So he's a treasure seeker. As a teenager, his dad was into it. His dad used magical things. You ever heard of like a dowsing rod or a what's the name of the rod? Anyway, they call it a dowsing rod's another word. So like they're gonna look for water or something, and it does something to indicate it. They don't have ground penetrating radars. It's not the History Channel. They've got like a stick made out of like witch hazel or something. Witch hazel? Yeah, there's a reason for that. Like Hollywood, you know where Hollywood is in LA? Hollywood. It's magical, in case you don't know. It's, Holly. There's a lot of things in our language that mean things that you don't understand what they mean until you look things up. And anyway, so he was seeking things, and he had quite a reputation. So, because he'd find, somebody's lost cow or whatever. Some people say he was like stealing their chickens and then coming up and, and then finding them with a seer stone. I have no idea, and that's one of the things that really you can't substantiate. That's one of those things that go into the realm of, hey, you can't really substantiate that kind of thing. But it can be substantiated that they definitely did utilize magic in their treasure digging thing. They weren't using ground penetrating radar. They were using a seer stone, and Joseph Smith was the dude. He wasn't the only guy that did it. He was associated with the guy. Maybe got some training from another guy that was, there locally that did it. And then there was, that girl. And seer stones come up in the Book of Mormon, or in the LDS history, like in the Doctrine and Covenants. When the Kirtland Bank folded, it wasn't really a bank because there's a lot of fraud involved and stuff. And so Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon took off to Canada for like 5 weeks. By the time they got back, half of the church in Kirtland was following it's like a 16-year-old girl who had a seer stone, seen visions in her stone, and she was leading the people. Joseph Smith had to really use his charisma to get a lot of the members back to follow him. All three of the three witnesses, that said they saw Moroni with the plates, they were following the little girl. I don't know. If you're 16, you might say, little girl, I'm not little. Okay, well, anyway, she was young, and she was 16, and I think she was 16, and she was using a seer stone. I don't know if it was a brown egg-shaped one, or a green one, or a clear one, or what, but she was seeing visions in a stone, and everybody was following her, including the three witnesses. These are the guys that chose the 12 apostles, in case you didn't know that. Yeah. Okay. So, seer stones were kind of common back then. There's people that are like atheists now that say, hey, isn't that ridiculous? But people practice magic today, and I'm not advocating it. It's not something I'd advocate at all. But there are people that use means that communicate with the spiritual world to find certain things out or find things. And it's condemned in Christianity. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I think it's a bad idea. So I think I would go with bad idea on that. Anyway, he was involved with that. So there's a guy that lived, near his town, around Palmyra, whose dad lived like 150 miles away. And this guy was searching for something. I think like a silver mine that he thought, had been established by the Spaniards or somebody a long time ago. Something like that. Anyway, we're talking about Josiah Stoll here. And he came 150 miles. Not in his BMW, but probably on his horse. So, to get to talk to Joseph Smith to say, hey, I'm firing my current seer because he can't find anything. So I want you to, come out here and I'll pay you. And you can spark up your seer stone. They call it crystal gazing. That's like, crystal ball. Basically the same principle. And you be the leader and show us where. You be our ground penetrating radar, seeing your visions in your rock in your hat. So Joseph Smith and his dad and some other people went out there to Josiah Stoll's place. And they stayed at the Hale's home. Isaac Hale was involved in the digging project too. Isaac Hale is the father of Emma Hale, which became Joseph's wife. They eloped. Joseph was not impressing Isaac Hale too much. He boarded at their home, and after a while Isaac Hale was saying, I don't feel so good about this dude hanging out with my daughter. He's kind of sketchy. He's looking in the He's a seer guy, and I'm not sure he's even honest about the things he says he sees because we never seem to find anything. This is in 1826, mind you. So somebody that saw God in 1820, and by the way, his family never heard that story ever. There are testimonies, and that's another thing. I've got one on the first vision. It documents all this stuff. Has interviews with, like his brother William, who was an apostle, and he's telling people, well, Joseph Smith started getting interested in religion in 1823 when we all started going to church because my brother Alvin died, and that's when he started getting interested in a religion. 1823, that's the year that supposedly, we had the Moroni visit in the current version. Used to be, a messenger, and his name was Nephi. After Joseph Smith died, from what I've read. I've seen 3 different things published. The original Pearl of Great Price, and like Morning and Evening Star, Millennial Star. 3 things published, and Joseph Smith said it was Nephi, not Moroni, by the way. Supposedly it was Orson Pratt that changed it to Moroni. But I have seen other stories where Joseph Smith mentions Moroni. They're like cruising along in their horse and carriage, and there's old men on the side of the road, and it's Moroni. They got really wild stories. I mean, it's better than like a lot of fairy tales. If you read the old church stuff, it's pretty interesting. So that's how he met his wife. Out looking for, he was the seer. But what does he write in the Joseph Smith history? And mind you, the first vision, he did not write that. It says it's like him writing. He didn't write that. That's like one of his helpers wrote that. And that's documented in one of the, like on my channel. You can see the titles to these things. You can figure out, which ones are which. This is the first vision that's going to have stuff to do with that. So, at any rate, he says in the history, what does he say? Well, they say I was a money digger. All I did is I was digging for like a month for Josiah Stowell, and now people have turned that into this big story about me being a money digger. Well, actually, your own mother says that, we had time, we didn't spend all our time doing the faculty of abrac. You ever heard of abracadabra? It's magic, words and stuff. We didn't spend all our time with that, but, we were involved, with magic. So, there's plenty of documentation, and there are people that try to explain things away. So you have to learn to look at the details yourself and not just believe whatever people say. Don't believe what I'm saying on it. Hear it and watch the other videos, and you'll see they show the documentation, just like I show the scriptures. I just mentioned that one, 132, and if you look at it, you can hear arguments about it, but they don't talk about certain facts in the argument, like David and Solomon exactly were condemned. They talk about, it says, unless I want to raise up seed or something. Was Joseph Smith raising up seed when he, supposedly, was married to, the church shows him married to like 33, 34 women. He never admitted that. He said, I'm not involved with any other women. What a thing it is to accuse a man of adultery. They say I have 7 wives, but I can find but one. We have these documents. When he went to Carthage, he just had the newspaper press destroyed because they printed something saying this guy's involved with other women. And they published section 132, which he'd never shown to the church. Just his buddies knew about it. William Law was in the first presidency. He didn't know about it. When he found out about it, he started speaking out. Sidney Rigdon knew about it, but he wasn't into the polygamy thing. Hiram was way into it. It wasn't polygamy, and that's a whole other video. I mean, that's in depth. It was not polygamy. What happened in Nauvoo was the most outrageous thing you've ever heard of. Basically, if you know what a timeshare is, for vacations, that's what it was. These women were like timeshares. Like, supposedly like 600 or more women, and then Joseph Smith is just going and visiting them, he and certain of his buddies. And they kind of basically got them into kind of a program. And you can say, oh, this sounds like lies. Well, there are testimonies as to what happened. And what we do find is with Joseph Smith's polygamy story versus what the church tries to say, oh, he's married to these gals. The first girl, he got this girl pregnant. She's a 16-year-old orphan that's staying at their home. And Joseph Smith got her pregnant in like 1833 or something. It was before any mention of any of this, sealing stuff. I mean, even sealing, parents to children. The whole Elijah story from section 110 of the Doctrine and Covenants, that was like years in the future. His wife, Emma saw him. He saw Joseph and Fanny Alger in the barn. Anyway, I'm not going to get into details on that. She uses a couple words. She's doing the transaction or something. But Fanny wound up pregnant, and Emma kicked her out of the house. So she was a 16-year-old girl pregnant on the streets, the dirt roads, with Joseph Smith's child. And is that polygamy? Is that something the Lord commanded? I mean, that's the start of it. If I go through these, and I'm not going to right at this moment, they're outrageous. And these are just the ones that the church calls wives. And of course they weren't wives. But it was completely illegal. How could he marry them? You know, every state he lived in, it was completely illegal. So, and they did not live as husband and wife. But Joseph and his buddies, Hiram and John Bennett, and these guys, you know, they visited the girls. They made the rounds. If you ever had a chicken coop, most of you haven't, and the rooster there, he's, you know, involved with a whole lot of hens. Kind of like that. So, except for he's at least helping them find food. So, he looked at a brown rock, supposedly in a hat, and that's where the stories from the Book of Mormon came from. He was not looking at these gold plates. The gold plates, it would have weighed about 200 pounds based on the dimension he gives. And you see movies from the church with him like running with these 200-pound plates, like they weigh about like 5 pounds, and then like smashing some dude in the face, and like 3 guys try to get him. It's just this wild story. And when you kind of fact check it, you go, wait a minute. You know, like First Vision movies, you know, they show, well, these people are singing at night and stuff. Yeah, they did have those revivals happen like probably like in the late summer or the fall when it's warm, right? Well, if you look at the First Vision story, and there's so many things that are wrong with it. You know, like I said, his own family didn't know about it, and then they said, you know, he saw an angel in his bedroom or saw an angel in the forest, you know, like in 1823 or 4. But this hasn't taken place in the spring of 1820, which means it would have had to have been a revival that got him started on this in 1819, like his, you know, 13-year-old or something. It says it was in his. He states he was in his 15th year, meaning he was already 14 years old, which occurs at the winter solstice, Christmas time. 15th year when this stuff happened. Well, his birthday is December 23rd. They don't, and so between December 23rd and, you know, whatever, first week of April or some early spring is when it sounds like it's happened in the Joseph Smith's story thing there. But it didn't happen in the winter. It didn't happen at all. They didn't have a revival those years. You know, they had like 1823 or 4, you know, 5. They had revivals. And his family said they went to him. They went to him because Alvin died, and they were upset, and they started checking out religions. What it says, would they be going to these religious places where these ministers were if they all hated Joseph Smith, were persecuting him, like he says? No. It says the reason was because of Alvin died. Alvin died in 1823 in November. There's so many things, but he says, oh, my family joined the Presbyterian Church. Well, they did get involved in the Presbyterian Church. You know, like 1824 at the beginning of the year or something. After, you know, late part of the year when they were bereaved. Said his dad didn't go because he was angry at the minister because he implied that Alvin was going to hell because he hadn't been baptized. Everything's about 1823, 1824. It's not 1820. So nobody heard these stories. Joseph Smith didn't base a church on, I had this first vision. He based it on, I've got these golden plates that a guardian spirit, which later was an angel, I guess, told me was a record of the American Indians. And I've been able to translate it. And that makes me a prophet. And you know, it tells, you know, how the American Indians got here. They're Jews, but they just got turned dark because they were wicked. Yeah. Of course, now you've probably heard something about the DNA. They're all testing out as Asians. You know, 99.4% of them test out showing their ancestries from Siberia. And you might hear some fancy apologists try to say, "Oh, there's this haplog group, and you know they got some Cherokees or whatever." And they base it on, oh, they just disappeared into an existing population of people that came over, you know, before Adam, and lived through the flood that didn't happen. You know, there's plenty of history of people in the Middle East, you know, civilizations that were not affected by any global flood, by the way. Christians love to argue about, oh, yeah, there was room for elephants on the ark. Hello, the people in Egypt were not washed away. Babylon, Sumer, China, they weren't washed away. The American Indians weren't washed away. Hey, here's another verify fact check break here. Take a look in your LDS Bible dictionary there. Find it on LDS.org, Bible dictionary. And what you will find under Egypt is a history of Egypt, a little bit, a brief history, but they start with 3000 BC and some dynasties, and they kind of go through there, and they're pretty vague. Well, they've basically gone from 3000 BC to 1700 when the Hyksos people are getting expelled or whatever. There's no game break for a flood and, people repopulating the land, Egyptus and her sons after the ark and all that story. They name one dynasty and then basically, cruise through, assuming no break, no devastation of civilization. So right there on LDS.org, they actually have a version that's a little closer to history, and there's no mention of anything that would have occurred from a global flood wiping out the people of Egypt. That civilization was never wiped out. Yet, right next to it, you've got, stories. Stories about the flood. So, another good thing to look at there is Wikipedia. And start looking up places in the Middle East. Start with like Babylon and Sumer, and Acadia, and you can go, from one to the next chronologically, and go through that period of 2344 BC, and before it, after it, and what you'll see is that there are extensive records indicating civilization was going right away, whether marriages, armies, wars, dynasties, real estate deals. Things were happening right through that flood period time. There wasn't a flood destroying them. I just found it especially interesting to see it in the Bible dictionary there, on LDS.org. Since you got the church teaching the flood, Genesis, it's part and parcel of the whole Bible story, the gospel story. It's heavy-duty church doctrine. Throw that away, and you're throwing away Mormonism and Christianity. So that's why you see these creationists arguing so much about how they could fit the animals on the ark, but they don't like to look at history because it's a big problem for them. It's a really big problem. Kind of reminds me of I didn't go to BYU, but BYU, I guess they teach science, organic evolution in one class, and you go to religion class and they're teaching the Genesis story, and they're not compatible. And that was something I bumped into once upon a time when I was looking for something inspirational or something on the internet, maybe for who knows what. But I tucked in something faith promoting. I thought about Joseph Smith, and I get this page from the grandson of Ezra Taft Benson, who had been the prophet, president of the church, and his grandson Steve had I think he'd gone on a mission and all that sort of thing. He was there at BYU, and he's thinking, why are we studying things that are exactly contradicting each other here? What's the deal? So he asks his grandpa, who's president of the Quorum of 12, and he doesn't give him an official answer. So he starts being his letter carrier between Steve and President Spencer Kimball, and it's kind of eye-opening because he just kept getting, the runaround from President Kimball. He'd say, well, have you read this book? Have you read that book? And he's like, dude, you're the prophet, what's the deal? Give us the word of the Lord on this. Well, what is it? Why do you teach organic evolution at BYU, and then you teach that it's not true in religion class? What's up? So we live in a world of contradiction in the church, which is why you have people, and especially BYU professors or other scholars, that write something factual that doesn't work well for what the church is representing in its marketing plan, basically, of the church is theology. When they show facts that don't work, whether they're in the scriptures or comparing the scriptures with scientific evidence or history, they get excommunicated and lose their jobs. Sorry, you're not the professor anymore. You're unemployed, and you're not a member of the church either. So, does that sound like, the gospel encompassing all truth, or does it sound like there are some real issues and the truth is the problem for the church? This is probably a good place to take a game break and continue on the next video. Probably get in a little bit more to this business about the DNA issue and how the church has reacted on LDS.org on the gospel topics issues, and see if they've backpedaled, lied, contradicted themselves like they did on race and priesthood. And I think you probably can guess, but I've studied it, and you'll also see several DNA versus the Lamanites, and the Promised Land, their patriarchal blessings, all this sort of thing, on in my channel, the Dodger Game channel here, with the Mormon Truth Video Library, the Mormon Truth videos, and you can do some research between this and the next video, watching some more of the ones that get into the documenting of the contradictions and so forth. MTV Library out. Help share the truth. Spread the Mormon Truth videos. Like them, share them, subscribe, post them. History doesn't need to be whitewashed. We got to the truth. You've seen it. You know it. It's documented. Do your part. Thanks.